The winter of 1878 had been especially cruel to the small town of Riverstone, Colorado. Snow blanketed the rugged landscape in thick, unforgiving layers, turning the familiar terrain into a treacherous wilderness that showed no mercy to the unprepared. It was in these harsh conditions that Sophia James found herself running for her life, each desperate step sinking into the snow that burned her bare feet with its icy touch. Sophia's lungs burned as she gasped for air, the bitter cold making each breath painful. Her once fine dress was torn and mudded, offering little protection against the relentless winter night. Behind her, the sounds of angry voices had faded, but she dared not slow down. The memory of what she had witnessed, what she had escaped, drove her forward despite the agony of her frozen feet. Tears streamed down her face, immediately crystallizing on her cheeks. She had left everything behind, her few possessions, her position as the schoolteacher, and the safety of the town she had called home for the past year. None of that mattered now. What mattered was putting as much distance as possible between herself and Sheriff Willis, whose drunken advances had turned violent when she refused him. The wind picked up, driving needles of snow into her face. Sophia stumbled, falling to her knees in the deep snow. Her body trembled violently, partly from fear, partly from the cold that was slowly claiming her. She tried to stand, but her feet had gone numb, refusing to cooperate. "I can't die here," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Not like this." In the distance, through the swirling snow, a faint light appeared. Hope surged within her, giving her the strength to rise once more. She staggered toward the light, praying it wasn't a mirage born of desperation. Owen Daniels sat before the crackling fire in his small cabin, cleaning his rifle as the storm raged outside. The lonely outpost had been his home for 3 years now, ever since he'd left behind the life of a ranch hand to stake his claim on a small plot of land tucked away in the mountains. It was a solitary existence, but after what he'd seen during his years as a cavalry scout, solitude was a blessing. The sudden, frantic pounding on his door startled him so badly he nearly dropped his rifle. Visitors were rare in good weather. In a blizzard like this, they were unheard of. Approaching the door cautiously, gun still in hand, Owen called out, "Who's there?" The only response was another weak knock, followed by what sounded like a sob. Owen unbolted the door, opening it just enough to peer out, then swung it wide in shock. There, collapsed against his doorframe, was a young woman hardly more than a girl, her dress torn, her hair wild, and her feet bare and blue with cold. "Good Lord," he breathed, setting aside his rifle and scooping her up without hesitation. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, her body shivering uncontrollably. "What in heaven's name are you doing out in this storm, miss?" Her eyes, wide with fear and pain, met his briefly before rolling back as she lost consciousness. Owen kicked the door shut behind him and carried her to the chair before the fire. Working quickly, he wrapped her in the thick buffalo hide he used as a blanket on the coldest nights. Her feet were in terrible condition, already showing signs of frostbite. He grabbed a basin, filled it with water from the kettle warming by the fire, and gently placed her feet in it, knowing the pain of warming them would be excruciating when she woke. As he tended to her, Owen studied her face. She was beautiful, with delicate features and dark hair that would likely shine like polished mahogany when it wasn't frozen and tangled. But there was something else, a bruise forming on her cheek, and a cut on her lip that hadn't been caused by the cold. Someone had hurt this woman, and then she'd fled into a blizzard with no coat and no boots. The thought made his jaw clench in anger. The stranger stirred, moaning in pain as sensation began returning to her feet. Her eyes fluttered open, immediately wide with panic as she realized she was in an unfamiliar place with a strange man. "Easy now," Owen said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You're safe here. I'm Owen Daniels. You collapsed at my door." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp. Owen quickly poured a cup of coffee, adding a generous amount of sugar before offering it to her. "Drink this. It'll help warm you from the inside." Her hands shook as she accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around it gratefully for the warmth. After a few careful sips, she found her voice. Sophia James. I'm the school teacher in Riverstone." She paused, wincing as the pain in her feet intensified. "Or I was." Owen nodded, moving to add more wood to the fire. "You want to tell me why a schoolteacher is running barefoot through a blizzard?" Sophia looked down at the cup in her hands. "Sheriff Willis, he had been drinking. He came to my boarding house room." Her voice trembled. "Said he'd been patient long enough, that it was time I showed proper appreciation for the job he'd helped me get. When I refused him, he became violent." Owen's expression darkened. "Willis?" "Ben Willis," Sophia nodded. "You know him?" "Know of him," Owen said grimly. "He has a reputation, and not a good one." He stood, pacing the small cabin. "Did anyone see you leave town?" "I don't think so. It was already dark and the storm was picking up. I slipped out the back of the boarding house after." She swallowed hard. "After I hit him with the fire poker." "He was on the floor, but I don't know if he was just unconscious or—" Her voice trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. Owen ran a hand through his hair. "If you defended yourself, you had every right, but Willis has friends in high places. If he's alive, he'll come looking for you, claiming you attacked him without provocation." Fear flashed across Sophia's face. "What am I going to do? I have nowhere to go, no money, nothing but what I'm wearing." Owen looked at her thoughtfully. He hardly knew this woman, yet something inside him couldn't bear the thought of turning her away. Perhaps it was the injustice of her situation, or maybe it was something in those expressive eyes that spoke to a part of him he thought long dead. "You'll stay here until you heal up and we figure out what to do," he said decisively. "No one comes up this way in winter. You'll be safe for now." Sophia's relief was palpable, but quickly followed by uncertainty. "I can't impose on you like that. You don't even know me." Owen shrugged, the movement making the firelight dance across his weathered features. "I know enough. No decent man would turn away someone in need, especially not in weather like this." He gestured to her feet, which were beginning to redden painfully as circulation returned. "Besides, you won't be going anywhere on those feet for a while." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Sophia's lips. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Owen," he corrected, "and there's no debt, just rest now." As Sophia's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, Owen removed his coat from a peg by the door. It was worn but warm, lined with sheepskin and far too large for her slight frame. He draped it over the buffalo hide already covering her. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." True to his word, Owen sat vigilant through the night, tending the fire and occasionally checking on Sophia, whose sleep was fitful and disturbed by nightmares. Each time she whimpered in her sleep, he found himself speaking softly to her, reassuring her she was safe until she settled once more. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to abate. Owen stood by the cabin's single window, watching the first pale light of day illuminate the pristine blanket of snow that stretched out before his property. In the chair by the fire, Sophia slept peacefully at last, wrapped in his coat, her face softened by sleep and the warm glow of the dying embers. Looking at her, Owen felt something stir within him, a protective instinct, certainly, but something else too. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It unsettled him, this sudden connection to a stranger who had literally fallen at his doorstep. He turned back to the window, reminding himself that this arrangement was temporary. Once her feet healed and the weather improved, Sophia James would move on, back to civilization and the life she had built. And he would return to his solitude, just as he preferred. Yet as the sun rose fully over the snow-covered mountains, casting the world in shades of pink and gold, Owen couldn't quite convince himself that things would ever truly return to the way they were before. Over the next few days, Sophia recovered her strength under Owen's care. The cabin was small, just one room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and the fireplace, but it was sturdy and warm. Owen insisted on sleeping on a bedroll near the fire while Sophia took the bed, despite her protests that she should be the one on the floor. "My feet still hurt too much to argue with you," she'd finally conceded with a smile that made Owen's heart do a curious flip in his chest. Her feet were indeed badly frostbitten, with blisters forming as they healed. Owen had carefully treated them with salve made from herbs he'd gathered the previous summer, wrapping them in clean cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. By the 3rd day, Sophia was hobbling around the cabin, eager to be useful despite Owen's insistence that she should rest. "I'm not used to being idle," she explained as she insisted on helping to prepare the evening meal. "I've been working since I was 16. Owen watched her as she chopped vegetables for the stew. "How did you come to be a teacher in Riverstone?" he asked. "It's not exactly a thriving metropolis." Sophia laughed, the sound bringing unexpected warmth to the cabin. "No, it certainly isn't. I came west from Boston after my parents died. There was nothing left for me there, and I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher." She shrugged. "I've always loved children and books, so it seemed like a good fit." "And was it? A good fit, I mean." "It was," she said softly. "The children were wonderful, eager to learn despite most of them having to help on their family farms before and after school." Her expression clouded. "I'll miss them." Owen leaned against the rough-hewn table, studying her. "You're assuming you can't go back. Can I?" Sophia looked up, her eyes meeting his directly. "Even if Sheriff Willis is alive, even if he doesn't press charges, everyone will believe his version of events. A respected lawman against a female teacher who's only been in town a year. I know how that story ends, Owen." He couldn't disagree. The West might be a place of new beginnings, but it was also a place where a woman's reputation was fragile, easily shattered by rumor and innuendo. "What will you do then?" he asked. Sophia returned to her chopping, though her movements were less certain. "I don't know. Travel farther west, perhaps. Find another small town in need of a teacher. Start over again." She paused. "But first, I need to earn enough money for a train ticket." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "There's a trading post about a day's ride from here. When the weather breaks and your feet are better, we can go there. The owner, Marcus, is a fair man. He might know of work for an educated woman." Sophia's relief was evident. "Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden for long." Later that evening, as they sat before the fire eating stew, Owen found himself wanting to know more about this resilient woman who had literally run into his life. "Tell me about Boston," he said. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Sophia's eyes lit up with memories. "It's nothing like this. The city is always alive with activity, carriages on cobblestone streets, ships in the harbor, people everywhere. My father was a professor at Harvard, so I grew up surrounded by books and ideas." She smiled wistfully. "But after he and my mother died of influenza, the house felt like a mausoleum. Every corner held a memory that broke my heart all over again." Owen nodded, understanding the need to escape painful memories. "Is that why you came so far west? To outrun the grief?" "Partly," Sophia admitted. but also because I wanted to do something meaningful. Out here, education isn't taken for granted. These children might be the first in their families to learn to read and write. That feels important. Owen studied her in the firelight, seeing the passion that animated her features when she spoke of teaching. "You're good at it, aren't you? Teaching, I mean." Sophia looked surprised by the observation. "I like to think so. How can you tell, the way you talk about it?" "Like it's a calling, not just a job." He set aside his empty bowl. "That's rare." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Owen found himself watching Sophia as she gazed into the flames, wondering what she was thinking. She caught him looking and smiled, a gentle expression that reached her eyes. "What about you?" she asked. "How did you end up here all alone?" Owen hesitated. He rarely spoke about his past, preferring to let it remain buried. But something about Sophia's open honesty made him want to reciprocate. "I was in the cavalry," he began. "Stationed at Fort Lyon. I saw things during that time. Did things I'm not proud of." He stared into the fire, the memories playing across his mind. "After I mustered out, I couldn't stomach being around people much. Bought this parcel of land, built this cabin with my own hands." Sophia listened intently, not interrupting. When he fell silent, she asked softly, "Do you ever get lonely?" The question caught him off guard. Did he? He'd convinced himself that solitude was what he wanted, what he deserved. But these past few days with Sophia had awakened something in him, a hunger for conversation, for shared meals, for the simple comfort of another human presence. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's a fair trade for peace." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Peace is valuable, but so is connection." She reached across the small space between them, briefly touching his hand. "Thank you for sharing your peace with me, even if it's just for a little while." The touch, though fleeting, sent a jolt through Owen that he hadn't expected. He withdrew his hand, not rudely but with a deliberate casualness that belied the sudden racing of his heart. "You should get some rest," he said, standing to clear away their bowls. "Your feet need time to heal properly." Sophia rose as well, wincing slightly as she put weight on her injured feet. "You're right. Good night, Owen, and thank you again for everything." As she made her way to the bed, Owen busied himself with cleaning up, trying to ignore the way her presence had suddenly made his cabin feel both smaller and more like a home than it had in all the years he'd lived there. That night, as he lay on his bedroll listening to Sophia's soft, regular breathing from the bed, Owen faced an uncomfortable truth. He was in danger of becoming attached to this woman who would inevitably leave once the weather cleared and her feet healed. The realization should have strengthened his resolve to maintain distance between them, but instead, it only made him aware of how much he would miss her when she was gone. The following days fell into a comfortable routine. Sophia's feet improved steadily, allowing her to move about the cabin with greater ease. She insisted on taking on more household tasks, showing a practical competence that impressed Owen. In return, he taught her about survival in the wilderness, how to identify animal tracks in the snow, which plants would emerge first in spring, and could be used for medicine or food, how to predict weather changes by watching the sky. They talked for hours each evening, sharing stories of their lives before they'd met. Owen spoke of his childhood on a farm in Missouri, his decision to join the cavalry seeking adventure, and the harsh realities of military life that had disillusioned him. Sophia told him about growing up in intellectual circles in Boston, her love of literature and art, and her dream of someday opening her own school where all children, regardless of background or circumstances, could receive an education. As January gave way to February, the worst of winter's grip began to ease. The days grew incrementally longer, and the sun occasionally broke through the clouds, strong enough to melt the top layer of snow during midday before it froze again at night. One clear morning, Owen announced it was time to check his trap lines. "We're running low on meat," he explained as he pulled on his heavy coat. "I won't be gone long, just a few hours." Sophia looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of Owen's that had torn at the seam. "Could I come with you? My feet feel much better, and I'd love to see more than just these four walls, as cozy as they are." Owen hesitated. The trap lines weren't far, but the terrain was rough and still covered in snow. Yet the eager look in Sophia's eyes made it hard to refuse her. "All right," he agreed. "But you'll need proper footwear. Your boots were ruined by frostbite." He rummaged through a trunk and produced a pair of moccasin-style boots. "These might be big, but we can stuff them with rags to make them fit better. They're lined with rabbit fur, they'll keep your feet warm." The boots were indeed too large, but with Owen's modifications, they stayed on Sophia's feet well enough. He also lent her a spare coat and a hat with ear flaps that made her laugh when she saw her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the door. "I look like a trapper myself," she said, grinning. "A very pretty trapper," Owen replied without thinking, then felt his face grow warm at his own words. The morning was crisp and bright as they set out, the snow sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. Owen moved with the easy confidence of someone intimately familiar with the landscape, occasionally pointing out features of interest. A tree where a family of squirrels had made their winter nest, the distant ridge where he'd once seen a mountain lion, the frozen creek that would become a rushing stream come spring thaw. Sophia absorbed it all with genuine interest, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion, her eyes bright with excitement at this new experience. Owen found himself watching her more than the trail, captivated by her obvious delight in the natural beauty surrounding them. They checked the traps methodically, finding 2 rabbits and a small fox that had been caught. Owen dispatched the fox quickly and humanely, explaining to Sophia that its fur would make excellent gloves or a collar for a coat. "I've never thought much about where such things come from," Sophia admitted as they headed back to the cabin. "In Boston, I simply bought what I needed from shops. Out here, you learn to use everything available to you," Owen said. "It's not just about survival, it's about respect for the animals that sustain us. Nothing goes to waste." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "There's a certain honesty in that, a directness that city living lacks." She looked around at the wilderness stretching in every direction. "I can see why you chose this life, even with its hardships. There's a clarity to it." Owen glanced at her, surprised by her understanding. Most city folks he'd encountered viewed his way of living as primitive, something to be pitied or improved upon. But Sophia seemed to grasp the purpose behind his choices. "It suits me," he said simply. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps crunching in the snow and the occasional call of a bird. "What will you miss most about teaching?" Owen asked suddenly. Sophia considered the question. The moment when a child understands something for the first time, when their face lights up with that realization, it's like watching a lamp being lit from within. She sighed. "I'll find another teaching position eventually, but I'll miss my students in Riverstone. They were special to me." Owen nodded, understanding the attachment. "You made a difference in their lives. That counts for something, even if your time with them was cut short." As they neared the cabin, Sophia slowed her pace, looking up at Owen with a serious expression. "May I ask you something personal?" He nodded, curious. "Why do you really live alone out here? Is it truly just for peace, or are you hiding from something?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Owen was silent for several steps, weighing his response. "During the war," he finally said, I followed orders that led to the deaths of innocent people, women, children. Afterwards, the army called it a regrettable mistake, but those people were still dead. He stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. How do you live among decent folk when you have that on your conscience? Sophia's expression was compassionate but not pitying. By remembering that you're not the sum of your worst mistakes, by finding ways to do good in the world, even small ways. Owen looked down at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. Is that what you're doing, finding ways to do good? I'm trying, she said softly. We all are in our own ways. Even you, Owen Daniels, living in your self-imposed exile, you still stop to help a stranger in need. The observation left Owen speechless. He'd never considered his isolated existence in those terms before that. Even in his withdrawal from society, he hadn't lost his fundamental humanity. They reached the cabin, and as Owen held the door open for Sophia, their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection deeper than words could express. Owen felt it like a physical sensation, a warmth spreading through his chest despite the winter chill. That evening, as they prepared the rabbit for dinner, working side by side in the small space, Owen found himself hyper-aware of Sophia's presence, the soft sound of her breathing, the way her hands moved deftly with the knife, the scent of her hair when she leaned close to reach for the herbs hanging from the ceiling rafters. You'd make a good frontier wife, he said without thinking, then immediately regretted the words when Sophia looked up at him in surprise. I mean, he stammered, you've adapted well to the conditions here. Sophia's lips curved in a small smile. Thank you, that's high praise coming from you. She returned to her task, adding casually, though I never imagined myself as a frontier wife. In Boston, I was expected to marry a professor or a lawyer, someone from my father's circle. And is that what you wanted? Owen asked, curious despite himself. Sophia shook her head. I wanted a partner who saw me as an equal, someone who valued my mind and my dreams as much as I valued theirs. She glanced at him. That was harder to find than you might think, even in enlightened Boston. Owen could believe it. Sophia was unlike any woman he'd ever met, educated but practical, refined but adaptable, gentle but with an inner strength that had enabled her to survive circumstances that would have broken many others. Well, he said, focusing on the rabbit he was skinning, any man worth his salt would consider himself fortunate to have such a wife. Sophia didn't respond immediately, but when Owen risked a glance at her, he saw a faint blush coloring her cheeks and a pleased expression that made his heart beat a little faster. Later that night, after they had eaten and were sitting by the fire, Sophia brought up the subject of her departure. The weather is improving, she observed. Soon the trails will be passable enough to reach the trading post you mentioned. Owen nodded, though the thought of her leaving created a hollow feeling in his chest. Another week, perhaps two, then we can make the journey. Sophia studied him across the fire. Will you be glad to have your cabin to yourself again? I know my presence has disrupted your routine. The question caught him off guard. Would he be glad? The truth was that he had grown accustomed to her presence more than accustomed. He had come to look forward to their conversations, to the sound of her laughter, to the way she made this isolated cabin feel like a home. I've enjoyed the company, he said carefully, but I understand you need to move on, build a new life somewhere. Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. Yes, I suppose I do. She hesitated, then added softly, though I've come to care for this place more than I expected to. Was she speaking of the cabin, the mountains, or someone else entirely? Owen wasn't sure, and he wasn't brave enough to ask for clarification. The days that followed were marked by a subtle tension, an awareness between them that neither seemed willing to address directly. They continued their routine cooking, tending the cabin, taking short walks as Sophia's strength returned fully, but there was an underlying current of anticipation, as if both were waiting for something to change. That change came unexpectedly one afternoon when Owen returned from chopping wood to find Sophia standing tensely by the window, her face pale. "There are riders coming," she said, her voice tight with fear. "3 of them, following the trail that leads here." Owen quickly moved to the window, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle that hung nearby. In the distance, he could make out 3 mounted figures making their way slowly but deliberately through the snow toward the cabin. "Stay inside," he instructed, checking that his gun was loaded. It could be nothing travelers seeking shelter, but best to be cautious. He stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Standing on his porch, rifle not aimed but ready in his hands, he waited as the riders approached. As they drew nearer, his suspicion turned to certainty. The lead rider wore a badge that caught the sunlight. Sheriff Willis had found them. Owen's mind raced. How had they tracked Sophia here? The storm should have covered any trail she might have left. Then he remembered his own trips to check traps and hunt game. His tracks would have been visible once the weather cleared, leading any determined searcher directly to his cabin. The riders halted about 20 yards from the cabin. Sheriff Willis was a burly man with a thick mustache and small, hard eyes that assessed Owen coldly. A purple bruise marked his temple, evidence of Sophia's desperate defense with the fire poker. "Afternoon," Willis called out, his voice carrying easily in the still, cold air. "We're looking for a fugitive. Young woman, dark hair, attacked me in my official capacity and fled town. Tracks suggest she came this way." Owen kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Not many travelers this time of year." Willis's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look inside your cabin, just to be thorough?" "I do mind," Owen replied evenly. "This is my property. Unless you have a warrant from a judge, you've no right to search it." Willis smiled unpleasantly. "Now, why would an innocent man have anything to hide?" "Unless you're harboring a criminal." "I value my privacy," Owen said, not backing down. "That's why I live up here, away from town." One of Willis's deputies, a weasel-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth, leaned over to whisper something to the sheriff. Willis nodded, his smile widening. "That's right," he said. "You're Owen Daniels, aren't you? Former cavalry. There are some interesting stories about your service record." Owen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "My service is long over. I'm just a homesteader now." "A homesteader harboring a woman who assaulted an officer of the law," Willis countered. "Hand her over, Daniels, and maybe we can forget about those stories from your army days." Before Owen could respond, the cabin door opened behind him. Sophia stepped out, her chin raised defiantly despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I'm here, Sheriff," she said clearly, "but we both know I acted in self-defense when you attacked me." Willis's face darkened with anger. "That's not how I recall it, Miss James. I came to check on your welfare, and you flew into a rage, attacking me without provocation." "That's a lie," Sophia said, her voice steady. "You came to my room drunk and tried to force yourself on me. I defended myself, as any woman would." The 2 deputies exchanged glances, their expressions suggesting this wasn't the first time they'd heard such accusations against their boss. Willis's hand moved to his gun. "You're coming back to Riverstone to face charges, Miss James, one way or another." Owen shifted slightly, positioning himself between Sophia and the sheriff. "No, she's not." His voice was quiet but firm. "You've made a long ride for nothing, Willis. Turn around and head back to town." The tension in the air was palpable as Willis assessed the situation. 3 armed men against one, but Owen's reputation as a marksman was well known, and the determined set of his jaw made it clear he wouldn't back down. "You're making a mistake, Daniels," Willis growled. "Throwing your lot in with a woman like her. She's not worth it." "I disagree," Owen said simply. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Willis spat into the snow, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over. The law will catch up with both of you eventually." With that, he jerked his horse around and spurred it back down the trail, his deputies following close behind. Owen watched until they were well out of sight before lowering his rifle and turning to Sophia, who stood trembling on the porch. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "With more men." Owen nodded grimly. "Not right away, the trail's too difficult for a large posse, but yes, eventually they'll return." Sophia's shoulders slumped. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door, Owen. I'm so sorry." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "You have nothing to apologize for." "Willis is the one who should be sorry." "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small. Owen looked out at the wilderness stretching before them, considering their options. "We can't stay here. Willis knows where to find us now." "Where will we go? I have no money, no possessions." Owen squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I have some savings. Gold I've kept from selling furs over the years. Enough to get us somewhere new, somewhere Willis and his kind can't reach us." Sophia looked up at him, hope and uncertainty mingling in her expression. "Us?" The simple question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Owen realized he'd made his decision without even thinking about it. The idea of sending Sophia away alone was unthinkable now. "Yes," he said firmly, "us, if you'll have my company." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, relief, gratitude, and perhaps something deeper. "I can't ask you to leave your home because of me." Owen glanced back at the cabin. It had been his sanctuary, his hiding place from a world he no longer felt part of. But in the past weeks, with Sophia there, he'd begun to realize what it had really been. A prison of his own making. "It's just a cabin," he said. "Home is." He hesitated, uncertain how to express what he was feeling. "Home can be elsewhere, with the right person." Sophia's eyes widened slightly at his words, and a soft blush colored her cheeks. "Where would we go?" "West," Owen decided. "California, maybe, or north to Montana Territory. Somewhere we can start fresh." Sophia nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, at first light." "We'll pack only what we can carry easily. Travel fast and light until we're well away from Riverstone's jurisdiction." That evening was spent in purposeful preparation. Owen gathered supplies, ammunition, dried food, and the tools they would need for the journey. Sophia packed clothing and blankets, her movements efficient despite the anxiety that must have been consuming her. As they worked, Owen found himself watching her, struck by her resilience. Most women of her background would have been broken by what she had endured: the attack, the flight through the blizzard, and now this forced journey into the unknown. Yet she moved with determination, her fear evident but controlled. "You're staring," she observed, glancing up from folding a blanket. Owen didn't look away. "I'm admiring," he corrected. "Your courage." Sophia's hand stilled. "I don't feel very courageous. I'm terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Owen moved closer, taking the blanket from her hands and setting it aside. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Sophia James." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength equally visible in her expression. "Why are you doing this, Owen? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since he'd made the decision to leave with her. The answer had been forming in his heart for weeks, though he'd been reluctant to acknowledge it fully. "Because in the short time I've known you, "You've reminded me what it means to live rather than just exist," he said quietly. "And because I can't imagine returning to solitude after knowing your company." Sophia's breath caught at his words. She reached up, her hand gently touching his cheek. "Is that the only reason?" Owen covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "No," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion, "but I'm afraid to speak the rest aloud." "Why?" she whispered. "Because I have no right to it, to you." He stepped back slightly, creating distance between them. "I've done things, Sophia, things that can't be undone or forgiven." Sophia closed the gap he'd created, her eyes never leaving his. "Everyone carries burdens from their past, Owen. What matters is who we choose to be now, today." Her words struck him deeply, resonating with a truth he had been running from for years. Who was he choosing to be? A man defined forever by his darkest moments, or someone capable of growth, of change, of love? "I'm choosing to be a man worthy of standing beside you," he said finally. "Whatever that takes." Sophia's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "You already are that man, Owen Daniels. You have been since the moment you opened your door to a half-frozen stranger and wrapped her in your coat." The memory of that night, Sophia trembling with cold and fear, himself holding her close to share his warmth, seemed both recent and distant, as if a lifetime had passed in mere weeks. Without conscious thought, Owen leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as Sophia responded, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "Never thought I deserved to." "Perhaps that's why we found each other," Sophia replied softly. "Neither of us was looking, but we both needed someone who understood." They spent their last night in the cabin holding each other close, speaking softly of their hopes for the future, planning their journey west. Sophia fell asleep in Owen's arms, her head resting on his chest, while he remained awake, listening to the wind outside and making silent promises to protect the woman who had unexpectedly captured his heart. Morning came with clear skies and a biting cold that spoke of a hard journey ahead. They ate a simple breakfast, packed the last of their provisions, and prepared to leave the cabin that had been both refuge and beginning for them. Owen took a final look around the simple dwelling. "I'll miss this place," he admitted. "It served me well." Sophia squeezed his hand. "Perhaps someday we'll build another cabin, somewhere safe." The thought warmed him. "I'd like that." They set out just as the sun was clearing the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. Owen had decided they would head northwest, avoiding the main trails and settlements where Willis might have sent word to watch for them. It would be a challenging route, but one that offered the best chance of escaping pursuit. Sophia rode Owen's mare while he led the way on foot, his rifle at the ready and his eyes constantly scanning for signs of danger. They traveled in silence for the most part, conserving energy and staying alert to their surroundings. By midday, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the cabin. They stopped briefly to rest and eat some dried venison, sitting close together for warmth. "You think they've returned to the cabin yet?" Sophia asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Probably," Owen replied. "Willis strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily when his pride is wounded." Sophia shuddered slightly. "I still can't believe I hit him with that poker. I've never been violent in my life." Owen put his arm around her shoulders. "You did what was necessary to survive. There's no shame in that." They continued their journey as the afternoon waned, the terrain becoming increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains. Owen knew of a hunter's shelter about a day's travel from his cabin, a crude but solid structure that would provide protection for the night. As dusk approached, he spotted the small log shelter nestled among a stand of pines. "There," he pointed. "We'll rest there tonight." The shelter was little more than a three-sided lean-to with a stone fireplace, but it would keep them out of the wind and allow for a fire without the smoke being visible from a distance. Owen quickly gathered wood while Sophia arranged their bedrolls inside. Once the fire was burning steadily, casting a warm glow over the small space, they sat side by side, sharing a meal of jerky and hard biscuits. "It's strange," Sophia mused, looking out at the darkening forest. "A month ago, I was teaching children to read and write in a warm schoolhouse. Now I'm a fugitive, fleeing through the wilderness with a man I barely knew a few weeks ago." Owen glanced at her profile, illuminated by the firelight. "Do you regret it, coming with me?" Sophia turned to meet his gaze, her expression serious. "No. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, I don't regret a moment of it." She smiled slightly. "Is that strange? That in the midst of running for my life, I feel more alive than I ever have." Owen understood exactly what she meant. His own existence had been transformed from the moment she'd appeared at his door. What had once been mere survival had become living again. "Not strange at all," he assured her, taking her hand in his. "Sometimes we don't know what we're missing until it finds us." Sophia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I was so afraid that night I ran from Riverstone, afraid of Willis, afraid of freezing to death, afraid of what would become of me. I never imagined I was running towards something, not just away." Owen pressed a kiss to the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. "I'm glad you found my cabin." "So am I," she whispered. They slept close that night, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, the fire burning low but steady. Owen woke several times, alert to every sound in the forest, protective of the woman sleeping trustingly beside him. Each time, he would watch her peaceful face for a few moments, before returning to his own fitful sleep. Dawn broke clear and cold, the sky a pale blue that promised fair weather for their journey. They ate quickly, packed their few belongings, and continued northwest, now traveling through dense forest that would provide cover but slow their progress. "How far to the nearest town?" Sophia asked as they made their way carefully down a steep, wooded slope. 3 days' travel, maybe 4 in these conditions," Owen replied. "It's a mining settlement called Prospect, small but with a stage connection to larger towns. From there, we can decide our next move." Sophia nodded, her determination evident in the set of her shoulders despite the difficulty of the journey. Owen marveled again at her strength, so at odds with her delicate appearance. They traveled steadily through the day, stopping only briefly to rest and eat. The terrain became increasingly rough, forcing them to pick their way carefully around boulders and across small, frozen streams. As afternoon began to fade toward evening, Owen spotted tracks in the snow ahead, horse tracks, relatively fresh. "Someone's been through here recently," he said quietly, kneeling to examine the prints more closely. Sophia tensed. "Willis?" Owen shook his head. "Don't think so. These tracks are heading in the same direction we are, not coming from behind us." He stood, his expression troubled. "Still, we should be cautious. There aren't many travelers in these parts this time of year." They proceeded with even greater care, Owen frequently stopping to listen and scan their surroundings. The forest was quiet, too quiet, he thought, missing the usual sounds of birds and small animals. As they rounded a bend in the crude trail, Owen suddenly raised his hand, signaling Sophia to stop. Ahead, in a small clearing, stood a camp. 2 tents, a fire pit, and 3 horses tethered to a line strung between trees. "Stay back," Owen whispered, easing his rifle from its scabbard. "Something's not right." Before they could retreat, A voice called out from the trees to their right. "That's far enough, friends." Owen turned sharply, raising his rifle toward the sound. A man stepped from behind a large pine, his own rifle pointed casually but definitively in their direction. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face partially hidden by a thick beard. "We're just passing through," Owen said evenly. "No quarrel with you." The man nodded. "Passing through to where, exactly?" "Not much beyond here except wilderness for 100 miles. "That's our business," Owen replied, not lowering his weapon. 2 more men emerged from the camp area, both armed. One was older, with gray streaking his dark hair. The other was younger, perhaps in his early 20s, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Awful defensive for simple travelers," the older man observed, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Owen assessed the situation rapidly. 3 armed men against him, with Sophia vulnerable on horseback. Fighting would be foolish unless absolutely necessary. "We're trying to reach Prospect," he said, deciding a partial truth was safer than continued evasion. "My wife and I are relocating after some trouble back east." The bearded man who had first addressed them glanced at Sophia, his expression softening slightly at the sight of a woman. "Trouble, eh? What kind of trouble makes folks take the hard route through mountain wilderness in February?" Before Owen could formulate a response, the younger man with the scar stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Sophia. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "I know that woman. Her picture's been circulated to every settlement within 100 miles. He looked at Owen triumphantly. "She's wanted for attacking Sheriff Willis over in Riverstone. There's a reward." Owen's grip tightened on his rifle. "You're mistaken." "No mistake," the young man insisted. "Dark hair, pretty face, schoolteacher. That's her all right." The older man and the bearded one exchanged glances. "Reward, you say?" the older one asked. "How much?" $50, the scarred man replied, his eyes never leaving Sophia, who sat rigid with fear on the horse. Owen made a swift calculation. If he fired, he might take down 1 or even 2 of the men, but not before one of them got a shot off, possibly at Sophia. Diplomacy seemed the better option, at least temporarily. "Whatever you've heard about my wife is false," he said firmly. "We want no trouble. Let us pass and we'll be on our way." The bearded man, who seemed to be the leader of the group, considered this for a moment. $50 is $50, he said finally. "But I don't much like turning a woman over to a man like Willis. His reputation travels." Hope flickered in Owen's chest. Perhaps these men weren't bounty hunters or outlaws, just trappers or prospectors who might be reasoned with. "Willis attacked her," Owen said, deciding to risk the truth. "She defended herself and fled. Now he's using his badge to hunt her down like an animal." The bearded man's eyes moved to Sophia. "That true, madam?" Sophia met his gaze directly. "Every word. Sheriff Willis tried to force himself on me. When I refused him, he became violent. I struck him with a fire poker and ran. If Mr. Daniels hadn't found me, I would have frozen to death in the snow." Her simple, dignified account seemed to impact the men. The older one removed his hat, running a hand through his hair uncomfortably. "Sounds about right for Willis," he muttered. "Never did trust that snake." The bearded leader nodded slowly. "Jacob, put that rifle down. These folks aren't our concern." He turned to Owen. "You're welcome to share our fire tonight. Storm's brewing, you can see the clouds moving in from the west. Not a good night to be traveling, especially with a woman." Owen hesitated, still unsure whether to trust these strangers. The offer of shelter was tempting, particularly with the weather turning, but caution had kept him alive this long. "How do I know you won't change your minds about that reward while we sleep?" he asked bluntly. The bearded man chuckled. "Fair question. I'm Samuel Keene, "This is my brother Ephraim," he nodded toward the older man, "and our nephew Jacob," indicating the scarred youth. "We're trappers, heading back to our cabin after selling furs in Denver. We've had our own run-ins with men like Willis. Don't much care for corrupt lawmen," Ephraim spoke up. "We've got food to share, and the boy can keep first watch if it makes you feel better." He glanced at Sophia with something like paternal concern. "Lady looks tired. Could use a proper meal and rest by a fire." Owen looked to Sophia, silently asking her opinion. She gave a small nod, her eyes conveying that she trusted his judgment. "We accept your hospitality," Owen said finally, lowering his rifle slightly but keeping it ready. "And we're grateful for it." The camp proved more comfortable than Owen had expected. The Keene brothers had a large tent with a small portable stove inside that provided considerable warmth. They offered Sophia this shelter while the men remained outside around the main fire. The meal was simple but hearty rabbit stew with biscuits baked in a Dutch oven. As they ate, Samuel explained that they trapped through the winter months, then sold their furs in spring before returning to their homestead in the mountains for the summer. "Good life," he said, spooning more stew into his bowl. "Free, at least. No one telling you what to do or how to live." Owen nodded in understanding. "That's why I settled in my cabin. After the war, I'd had enough of following orders." Samuel studied him thoughtfully. "Cavalry?" "Yes." "Stationed at Fort Lyon." A shadow passed over Samuel's face. "Were you at Sand Creek?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The Sand Creek Massacre was a dark chapter in the territory's history, a brutal attack on a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village that had left hundreds dead, most of them women and children. Owen met the trapper's gaze steadily. "I was. Not by choice, not proudly." Samuel nodded slowly. "Thought as much. Got that look about you, seen too much, done things that haunt you." "You speak from experience," Owen observed. "Ephraim and I were scouts during the war, saw our share of ugliness." Samuel glanced toward the tent where Sophia had retired after dinner. "That why you're helping her, trying to balance the scales?" Owen considered the question. Maybe at first, but now. He trailed off, unsure how to express what Sophia had come to mean to him. Samuel smiled slightly. "Now it's more than that, I understand." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "Where will you go? After Prospect, I mean. California, perhaps, or north to Montana, somewhere we can start fresh." "Montana's good country," Ephraim interjected. "Plenty of open land, fewer questions about a man's past." Jacob, who had been silent for most of the evening, suddenly spoke up. "If Willis has spread the word as far as he claims, you might have trouble in Prospect. Town's small, but the sheriff there is Willis's cousin by marriage." Owen frowned. This was unwelcome news. "Is there another route we could take, another settlement?" The brothers exchanged glances. "There's Elkhorn," Samuel said thoughtfully. "Smaller than Prospect, but they've got a stage that runs to Cheyenne once a week. Sheriff there is an honest man from what we've heard, no friend of Willis." "How far?" Owen asked. 2 days east of here, rougher trail but less chance of running into trouble." Owen nodded gratefully. "We'd be in your debt if you could point us in the right direction." Samuel waved off his thanks. "No debt. World's hard enough without good folks helping each other when they can." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm will hit by morning. You're welcome to travel with us to Elkhorn if you like, safer in numbers." The offer surprised Owen, who had grown accustomed to relying only on himself. But the prospect of friendly companionship on the difficult journey ahead was appealing, particularly with Sophia's safety at stake. "We'd be grateful for the company," he said finally. Later, as the others slept, Owen took his turn at watch, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his knees. The night was quiet except for the soft whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional hoot of an owl. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Sophia approaching, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. "You should be resting," he said gently as she sat beside him on the log serving as a bench. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." Owen put his arm around her, drawing her close to his side. "Having second thoughts about our journey?" Sophia shook her head. "No, just thinking about how quickly life can change. A month ago, I couldn't have imagined being here with you." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Despite everything, I'm not sorry." "Neither am I," Owen said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Sophia leaned against him, her hand finding his. "Do you really think we can start over somewhere new, build a life together?" The question held a vulnerability that touched Owen deeply. "Yes," he said with conviction. "It won't be easy, but we can do it. I've saved enough to buy land, build a cabin. You could teach again if you wanted to." Sophia smiled at the thought. "A small school, perhaps. Or private lessons to begin with. And eventually," Owen asked, curious about her dreams, "eventually a proper school, one where all children are welcome, regardless of background." Her expression grew thoughtful. "And a home of our own. Children, maybe, someday." The image she painted, a home, a family, a future together, filled Owen with a hope he had thought long dead. He had never dared to imagine such possibilities for himself after the war, convinced that happiness was a privilege he had forfeited through his actions. "I'd like that," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the night sounds of the forest. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice tentative. "Owen, there's something I need to ask you." He turned to look at her, noting the seriousness in her expression. "What is it?" Samuel asked. "If you were at Sand Creek, what happened there?" Owen felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of that day. He had never spoken of it to anyone, had carried the weight of those memories alone for years. But if he and Sophia were to build a life together, there could be no secrets between them. "It was 1864, he began slowly. "I was with the 3rd Colorado Cavalry under Colonel Chivington. We were told we were going to engage hostile Indians who had been raiding settlements." He paused, the memories sharp and painful. "But when we arrived at Sand Creek, we found a peaceful village. Chief Black Kettle had been assured of protection by the government. He flew an American flag over his lodge as a sign of peace." Sophia listened silently, her hand still clasped in his. "Chivington ordered us to attack anyway, said kill and scalp all, big and little, nits make lice. Some refused. Owen's voice faltered. "I hesitated too long. By the time I understood what was happening, the killing had begun. Women, children, elders cut down without mercy." "What did you do?" Sophia asked softly. "I fired over their heads, pretended to participate while trying to help some escape." Owen's jaw tightened with old anger. "It wasn't enough. I should have done more, should have stood against the orders immediately." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. Then she turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face. "You did what you could in an impossible situation. The fact that it haunts you, that you wish you'd done more, that's what makes you different from men like Chivington or Willis. That's why I trust you, why I love you." The declaration, so simply stated yet so profound, left Owen speechless. Love. A word he had never expected to hear directed at him again, certainly not from a woman like Sophia. "You can't know what you're saying," he protested weakly. "You don't know everything I've done, everything I've been." "I know enough," she countered firmly. "I know the man who opened his door to a stranger in a blizzard, who tended my wounds and shared his home, who's risking his life now to protect me." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "That's the man I love, Owen Daniels. The man you are now, not the soldier you were then." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "More than I thought possible." When he finally released her, Sophia's smile was radiant despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "Then that's all that matters. The past is behind us. We look forward now together." As if to punctuate her words, a few soft snowflakes began to fall, the advance scouts of the coming storm. Owen brushed one from Sophia's cheek. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Sophia nodded, but before rising, she leaned forward to kiss him, a tender promise of the future they would build together, whatever challenges lay ahead. True to Samuel's prediction, the storm arrived in full force by morning, blanketing the forest in fresh snow and limiting visibility to a few yards. The group decided to remain in camp for the day rather than risk travel in such conditions. The enforced rest proved beneficial for Sophia, whose strength had been tested by their journey thus far. She spent much of the day in conversation with Ephraim's wife, Martha, who had remained largely quiet the previous evening, but warmed considerably to Sophia's gentle inquiries about life as a trapper's wife. Owen found himself drawn into discussions with Samuel about routes to Montana Territory and the best locations for homesteading. The older man's knowledge of the region was extensive, and he generously shared insights that would prove valuable in the days ahead. "Land near Bozeman is good," Samuel advised, sketching a rough map in the snow with a stick. "Fertile soil, plenty of water, not too isolated. You could build a life there, both of you." Owen studied the crude map thoughtfully. "Is there need for teachers?" "Growing settlement means families with children, always need for learning." Samuel glanced toward Sophia, who was helping Martha mend a torn shirt by the fire. "She's got spirit, your lady. Reminds me of Martha when she was younger." Owen smiled. "She's stronger than she looks." "Best kind of woman for frontier life," Samuel nodded approvingly. "Beautiful as a sunrise but tough as hickory when it counts." By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed under a pristine blanket of white. The group decided to set out at first light for Elkhorn, taking advantage of the clear weather that typically followed such storms. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Owen found a moment alone with Sophia near the edge of camp. "Samuel says there might be opportunity for both of us near Bozeman," he told her. "Good land, growing settlement." Sophia's eyes lit up at the prospect. "Montana," she said, testing the word. "It sounds vast, untamed." "It is," Owen acknowledged. "Harder living than Boston or even Riverstone." "Are you sure it's what you want?" Sophia considered the question seriously, her gaze drifting to the star-filled sky above them. "A year ago, I would have said no. I came west seeking adventure, but I still imagined myself eventually returning to civilization, to gaslit streets and proper society." She turned to him, her expression resolute. "But now I know better what matters, not comfort or convention, but purpose, freedom, love." She took his hand. "Wherever you are, that's where I want to be, whether it's a cabin in the wilderness or a tent under the stars." Owen brought her hand to his lips, kissing it reverently. "I'll build you the finest cabin in Montana Territory, with bookshelves for your books and a proper desk where you can prepare your lessons." Sophia laughed softly. "And windows. I do love natural light." "Windows with real glass," Owen promised. "And a garden plot where you can grow flowers as well as vegetables." "It sounds perfect," Sophia sighed, leaning against him contentedly. The journey to Elkhorn took 3 days rather than the predicted 2, the fresh snow making travel slower than anticipated. But the Keene family proved to be excellent guides and companions, their knowledge of the terrain helping the group avoid potential hazards and find suitable camping spots each night. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill and saw elkhorn spread out in the valley below a small collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding countryside. "Not much to look at," Samuel acknowledged, "but it's a friendly enough place. Sheriff Harmon is fair-minded and the stage to Cheyenne leaves every Wednesday." Owen calculated quickly. "That's tomorrow." "Good timing," Ephraim observed. "Though you might want to consider staying a few days to rest up before the journey. Stage travel isn't comfortable in the best of times." They descended into the town as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. A few curious glances were directed their way as they passed the general store and saloon, but nothing that suggested recognition or suspicion. The town's single hotel was a modest two-story building with peeling paint but clean windows. Owen secured a room for himself and Sophia, using the story that they were a married couple heading to Montana to join family. The Keenes declined Owen's offer to buy them dinner, explaining that they had business at the trading post before it closed. They agreed to meet the following morning to say their farewells. Alone in their small hotel room, Sophia sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief. "A real mattress," she murmured. "I'd almost forgotten what one felt like." Owen smiled, setting down their packs. "Soft living already." What happened to that frontier spirit Samuel admired so much? Sophia threw a pillow at him, laughing. "Appreciating comfort when it's available is part of frontier wisdom, Mr. Daniels, as is making the most of hot water when you can get it." She eyed the pitcher and basin on the dresser longingly. "I'll go downstairs and see if they can bring up enough for a proper wash," Owen offered, "and find out about that stage tomorrow." While Sophia refreshed herself, Owen gathered information from the hotel proprietor and arranged for 2 tickets on the following day's stage to Cheyenne. From there, they could take the train north toward Montana Territory, a journey of several days, but far safer and more comfortable than continuing overland in winter conditions. They ate dinner in the small hotel dining room, both acutely aware of the luxury of a hot meal served on real plates after days of trail food. Afterward, they retired early, weary from travel and aware that tomorrow would bring the next phase of their journey. As they prepared for sleep, Sophia paused, looking out the window at the moonlit street below. "Do you think we're safe here, truly?" Owen came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "I believe so. We're well outside Riverstone's jurisdiction," and Samuel seemed confident about Sheriff Harmon's character. Sophia nodded, though anxiety still clouded her expression. "I keep expecting to see Willis around every corner, to have everything taken away again just when hope seems possible." "That's natural after what you've been through," Owen assured her. "But we're going to make it, Sophia. Tomorrow we'll be on that stage, and by week's end we'll be heading north to our new home." She turned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. "Our home," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They slept peacefully that night, the first untroubled rest either had enjoyed since fleeing Owen's cabin. Morning brought clear skies and the distant sound of the stage arriving from its westward journey. After a hearty breakfast, they gathered their few possessions and prepared to depart. The Keene family met them as promised, offering final advice for the journey ahead. "Wrote down some names for you," Samuel said, handing Owen a folded paper. "Friends in Bozeman who can help you get established. Tell them Sam Keene sent you." Owen accepted the paper gratefully. "We can't thank you enough for your help." Samuel waved off his gratitude. "Just doing what's right, World needs more of that. He turned to Sophia, his weathered face softening. You take care of each other, you hear? Frontier's no place for going it alone. We will, Sophia promised, impulsively embracing the surprised trapper. Thank you for everything. As the stage was being loaded, Sheriff Harmon appeared, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and watchful eyes. Owen tensed automatically, his hand moving closer to his concealed pistol, but the sheriff merely nodded politely, his gaze passing over them without particular interest. Morning, folks. Heading east today. Yes, sir, Owen replied evenly. On to Cheyenne, then north. Montana. The sheriff guessed. When Owen nodded, he continued, Good country up there. Growing fast, I hear. Good luck to you both. With that, he moved on, stopping to chat with the stage driver about road conditions ahead. Owen released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Sophia squeezed his hand reassuringly. The stage departed promptly at 10 o'clock, carrying Owen and Sophia along with 3 other passengers, an elderly couple returning home to Cheyenne, and a young man who identified himself as a land surveyor working for the railroad. The journey was uncomfortable, the coach swaying and jolting over the rough road, but each mile that passed took them further from danger and closer to their new beginning. Sophia spent much of the trip gazing out the window at the passing landscape, her expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension at the vast, untamed country stretching in all directions. Owen watched her, memorizing the way the winter sunlight caught in her hair, the thoughtful curve of her lips as she considered the view. He had never imagined finding such happiness again, especially not in the midst of danger and upheaval. Yet here it was a quiet joy that filled his heart, despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead. Their arrival in Cheyenne 3 days later marked the true beginning of their journey north. The bustling town, with its railroad depot and busy streets, offered anonymity and the promise of swift travel toward Montana territory. They secured passage on the northbound train, departing the following morning. That night, in the privacy of their modest hotel room, Owen pulled Sophia into his arms. There's something I need to ask you, he said solemnly. Something I should have asked before now. Sophia looked up at him, curious. What is it? Owen took her hands in his. Sophia James, when we reach Montana, will you marry me? Properly, legally, in front of witnesses. I know we've been presenting ourselves as husband and wife for convenience, but I want it to be true. I want to build our life together as your husband in every sense of the word. Sophia's face illuminated with joy, tears gathering in her eyes. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Owen Daniels, I will marry you. He kissed her then, sealing their promise with tenderness that deepened into passion, their shared love a beacon guiding them toward the future they would create together. The train journey north took them through Wyoming territory and into Montana, the landscape transforming from snow-covered plains to the rugged foothills of the mountains. Throughout the journey, Owen and Sophia planned their new life, discussing everything from the design of their cabin to the structure of the school Sophia hoped to establish. By the time they reached Bozeman in early March, they had a clear vision of the life they intended to build. Using Samuel's connections and Owen's savings, they purchased a plot of land on the outskirts of town, 40 acres, with a small existing cabin that could be expanded, a creek running along one edge, and a view of the mountains that took Sophia's breath away. They were married a week after their arrival, in the town's small church with Samuel's friends serving as witnesses. Sophia wore a simple blue dress purchased from the general store, while Owen, despite his protests about unnecessary expense, appeared in a new shirt and string tie at his bride's insistence. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the elderly pastor beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Owen's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a silent vow to cherish and protect the woman who had run barefoot through the snow into his life and changed it forever. Their wedding night was spent in their cabin, primitive still, with only the most basic furnishings, but already beginning to feel like home. Owen had added curtains to the windows using fabric Sophia had chosen, and a proper bed with a feather mattress ordered from back east stood in one corner. As they lay together in that bed, the moonlight streaming through the window and painting silvery patterns on the rough wooden floor, Sophia traced the lines of Owen's face with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked softly, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" Owen's smile was answer enough, but he added, "More than I ever thought possible, more than I deserve." Sophia shook her head firmly. "No more of that talk, Owen Daniels. We've both earned this happiness, and we'll work every day to be worthy of it and each other." Over the spring and summer, they transformed the small cabin into a proper home. Owen added 2 rooms, a study for Sophia with the promised bookshelves, and a second bedroom for the future, he said with a meaningful glance that made Sophia blush. Sophia planted the garden she had dreamed of, filling it with both practical vegetables and the flowers she loved. Word of her education and teaching experience spread quickly in the growing community, and by fall she had 6 students coming to the cabin, 3 days a week for lessons. Owen found work as a guide for hunting parties and settlers new to the territory, his knowledge of the land and survival skills in high demand. When not guiding, he worked their land, gradually clearing fields for crops and building corrals for the few animals they had acquired: a milk cow, 2 horses, and a flock of chickens that provided fresh eggs and endless amusement with their antics. On a golden afternoon in late September, as the aspens were beginning to turn to autumn flame, Sophia sat on the porch watching Owen split wood for the coming winter. The methodical rhythm of the axe, the scent of fresh cut pine, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead, all of it filled her with contentment. When Owen paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air, Sophia called him over. He set aside the axe and joined her on the porch bench, his arm automatically going around her shoulders. "What has you looking so pleased with yourself, Mrs. Daniels?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sophia leaned into him, her hand finding his. "I was just thinking about that night. The night I ran through the snow, how certain I was that it was the end of everything." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Instead, it was the beginning. Owen's expression softened with understanding and shared memory. "The beginning of everything that matters," he agreed. Sophia placed his hand gently on her stomach, watching as realization dawned in his eyes. "And our story continues," she said softly. "A new chapter come spring." Owen's face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby, you're certain?" Sophia nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday. We're going to be parents, Owen." He gathered her into his arms, holding her with such tenderness that tears sprang to Sophia's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for running to my door that night, for trusting me, for loving me enough to create this life with me." Sophia closed her eyes, savoring the moment. From the darkest night of her life had come this unexpected light, a love that had healed them both, a home built with their own hands, and now a child to share it with. "I love you, Owen Daniels," she said simply. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, hands entwined, hearts full. watching darkness give way to the promise of another dawn. In the years that followed, their family grew a daughter born that spring, followed by twin boys 3 years later. Sophia's small class expanded into a proper school built by the community, with Owen constructing the desks himself. Their land flourished under their care, providing abundance beyond what either had dared to hope for. And on cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the world outside their windows, they would tell their children the story of how their family began with a desperate flight through a blizzard, a door opening to shelter and safety, and a coat wrapped around shivering shoulders until dawn brought the first light of a new day and a love that would last a lifetime.